Stone Hill Winery was blessed with perfect cold and dry conditions during November and December of 2013 to produce our first ice wine. After the 2013 harvest was completed, it was decided to take the high risk of leaving 8 tons of Vidal Blanc grapes hanging on the vine at our Rao farm in Herman, Missouri. The Vidal Blanc vines were covered with net to protect it from the animals. It was left to endure the harsh and cold conditions of late fall and early winter. On the weekend of December 6th, the temperature finally got cold enough to freeze the grapes. By Monday, it was 20 degrees Fahrenheit and the grapes were frozen solid. When the grape freezes, the water inside it freezes as well, concentrating the sugars and other golden flavors. The early morning hours of December 10th saw our brave vineyard crew machine harvest the 8 tons of Vidal Blanc. The harvested grape bins with the frozen grapes were a frosty 10 degrees Fahrenheit. The grapes were rushed over to our winery in the quaint town of Herman, Missouri, where the winemaking started immediately before any thawing occurred and dilution of the natural grape sugars. The frozen berries and bunches are dumped into the hopper where it is augered to the destemmer and crusher. The destemmer cage has been removed to allow the berries to go through the crushing rollers into the must pump. Cellar workers brave the cold conditions to make sure everything goes as planned. The berries are then transferred with the must pump to our modern German membrane press, where the juice will be squeezed out. Very little juice is released from the grapes, only 10 to 15% of the normal yield. The pressing can take up to 13 hours. Close attention is being paid to the juice, making sure the grapes do not thaw out and dilute the sugar concentration. Once the press is done the next day, the press is emptied and the pressed grape skins will return to Mother Earth as compost. The winemaker then collects a sample of the juice to take to the lab for chemical and organoleptic analysis. First he will check the sugar, which will determine the final alcohol and sugar content of the finished ice wine. The sugars are usually 200% higher than what it would be at normal harvest. The high osmotic pressure creates extreme conditions for the yeast during fermentation. Using a pH meter, the winemaker then determines the pH of the wine. A pH between 3.35 and 3.6 is optimal, creating favorable conditions for fermentation and texture. Next, he will determine the titratable acidity of the juice. This will determine if acidification or deacidification is required to better the sugar-acid balance on the palate. A simple titration is done where a color change indicates the endpoint. The titration is then calculated and everything is recorded. Finally, and most importantly, the winemaker tastes the juice to determine the quality of the aroma and flavors. He also determines if any extra fining is required to remove astringent phenolics due to the lengthy press cycle. Once it is determined what additions to make, he will then add to the juice tank while gently mixing the juice with carbon dioxide gas. Over a 48-hour period, the juice is then allowed to react with the fining agents and also to cold settle to remove unwanted solids. After cold settling, the clarified juice is then racked off the settled solids to a different tank. Alcoholic fermentation is then started by rehydrating a commercial wine yeast and carefully acclimating it to the high osmotic stress conditions of the higher than normal sugar concentration of the juice. The juice will then ferment at about 60 degrees Fahrenheit until it is arrested when the correct sugar and alcohol levels have been reached. Look for our ice wine in early 2014 at one of Stone Hill Winery's locations in Missouri.